All right, hello everyone. This is going to be a quick overview of some of the changes that have been implemented into the user interface since the version 2 release of OpenExo. There are a couple things to note. That user interface is going to be visually a little bit different, and there have been a couple of quality of life changes that we'll cover in this video. And then in addition, the most important point is the config.ini folder or file that goes onto your SD card that gets plugged into the Teensy. The structure for that has been changed. It's been changed so that it's a little easier to read through and modify. However, the consequence of this is that the previous version of config.ini is no longer compatible with the newest version of the GUI. So in order to be able to run an exoskeleton, you'll need to take your SD card out of your Teensy, plug it into your computer. If you have any parameters saved for any of the controllers, say you're running the step controller on the hip and you have a certain torque set point that you want to save, or like certain number of repetitions you want to save, or any of the parameters relative to any of these files. If you need to save any of those parameters, just make a copy of your SD card that's currently in your Teensy, save it to your desktop or somewhere else where you can easily locate it. And then you'll need to delete all the files off of the SD card and replace them with the files within this SD card folder, which was downloaded from the OpenExo GitHub. So this is the newest version of that SD card folder. You'll need to copy that over to your SD card, plug it back into your Teensy, modify any parameters that you need to modify, and then you should be able to run the newest version of the GUI. So to cover some of the changes that have been made, we'll start with that config.ini file. Again, this is the newest version of that file. Before, we had many different definitions depending on which configuration of the exoskeleton you were running. Now it's been condensed pretty significantly. It's got the same overall structure, it's just a lot more condensed. So you can see here, we're using a hip. We can also define a knee, ankle, elbow, hip, ankle, so on and so forth. Which sides we're using, which motor we're using, which controller we're using, whether we're using torque sensors. So all of that is the same as before. Importantly, if you're updating to the new GUI and you're updating this config.ini folder, you'll need to change these from their default values to reflect the system that you have. So if you're running, say, an elbow with AK60 motors, you would change this to elbow and then go down to elbow, specify the AK60 motors, and then specify what controller you're using, whether you're using torque sensors, and so on. And so that's the config.ini folder. Next, we'll go into the newest Python GUI version. Again, there have been quite a few quality of life changes. It's also visually a bit different, but anybody who's used the GUI before will recognize a lot of the features of it in this newest version. And then the process for running the GUI is the exact same as before. You'll want to open a terminal at this folder. The process is the same on Windows. I'm running Mac right now, but you would open a command prompt at that folder or at the directory of that folder. And then you would need to type in Python 3 GUI.py. Depending on your system, it might be Python GUI.py or py GUI.py. But Python 3 GUI.py is what my system expects. So you can see the GUI's changed a bit visually. You can see we've still got the start scan, load save device, connect, calibrate torque, start trial. To connect your device, same process as before. You'll just start a scan, select your device, connect to it. And one of the first changes we're going to encounter right now is the calibrate torque button has been made mandatory. This is a safety feature for the systems that do use torque sensors. If, for example, someone was running a trial but forgot to hit this calibrate torque button, their 0 point for their torque sensors would likely not be at 0, and you would maybe get like a constant flexion or constant extension when you're not expecting that. And so just as a safety feature, this button has been made mandatory. If you don't have a torque sensor on your system, this button won't do anything. It just runs through a calibration script. If there are no torque sensors, nothing gets affected. So we'll go ahead and press that, and it'll take a couple seconds to run through that calibration script, and then we can start a trial. And so you can see just right off the bat, the GUI has changed pretty substantially just from a visual perspective. One of the first noticeable quality of life features is we now have titles on the plots based on what the default plotting parameters are for each joint configuration. So for the hip, it's going to be measured and desired torque. This is for the right side, this is for the left side. And so this replaces the parameter 0, parameter 1 plotting titles that were a bit unintuitive previously. And the same goes for the second page. So if you've used the GUI before, you'll likely know that there's a second page of the GUI. To toggle over to that second page, we'll just click the Toggle Data Points button, and that toggles us to this other page where the gate percentage and the toe FSR reading are being plotted for both sides. And another thing that's been added has been this legend here, so it's easy to understand what exactly is being plotted. And so swapping back over to the main page, the next thing we'll cover is this Update Controller button. Again, this is carried over from the previous version of the GUI. However, the Update Controller settings page has been updated pretty substantially. You can see we still have an option to select which joint we're using. And then you've got a left option and a right option. But so long as you have the bilateral mode checkbox checked here, the changes will apply bilaterally. So even though I've got the left hip selected, because this is checked, it'll apply to both sides. Again, this carries over from the previous version of the GUI. One of the big quality of life changes that's been implemented has been that when you go to update parameters, these actually have labels now, so you're not trying to reference a index number in the SD card. You've now got a more intuitive layout for this. And so I'm running the step controller right now. If I wanted to update the amplitude, I would simply go to the amplitude parameter and then specify a value. I'll say like 2. And then an important thing to note is that these parameters that get listed are specific to the controller you have selected. And so because I'm running the step controller, I get all of these parameters, but if I were running 0 torque, that's going to have a different set of parameters. And again, this is based on the SD card. This is the same structure you'll see in the SD card. It's just a visual readout of it in the GUI. But if I go to the 0 torque controller, you'll see that the parameter set is different. That represents the structure. In the SD card. So we'll go back to the step controller, modifying the amplitude. I want to set that to 2. And when I press apply, you'll see that change take effect. And so you can see that change has taken effect. We're now at a set point of 2 Newton meters as opposed to the previous 5. But again, the main takeaway there is that the Update Controller tab has been updated to be a bit more intuitive when you're adjusting parameters. And then going back into the main page, you can see a lot of these buttons, or essentially all of these buttons, carry over from the previous version of the GUI. We've got this mark trial button here, which will set a mark in the CSV that gets saved after the trial that holds all of the data that you see in these plots here. Every time that button is pressed, you'll get a new mark, and that'll reflect in the CSV. You'll see within the mark column, you'll see 1 for all the timestamps that were recorded while this was set to 1. Press that again, you'll have mark 2 now. And so all of the data points after I press this again will have that mark 2 on it. And so it's a convenient way to mark the data that you're interested in or that you are not interested in. Additionally, we've got the Save New CSV button here. This simply saves all of the data after that button is pressed into a new CSV, as opposed to just a single CSV that would have been saved for the entire trial. And then this Set CSV Prefix button allows you to name your CSVs. So by default, they're just time-stamped for their name. But if you wanted to say like outdoor trial before that timestamp, you can type outdoor trial here, and then it'll apply that name to the CSV. It'll still have the timestamp, but the outdoor trial label or whatever you specify for the label will be appended onto that name. And then again, this is the button we use to toggle between the data points. This toggles over to the other window. And then as before, we've got the biofeedback button, machine learning, recalibrate FSRs, send preset FSR, and recalibrate torque sensor. These are all going to carry over from the previous version of the GUI. And again, with the machine learning, this one is currently not functional, but the rest of these buttons in this tab here are all functional. And then just as a brief overview here, the biofeedback button brings you into the biofeedback window where you can set a target value. This was created for circumstances where you want, say, a participant wearing an ankle exoskeleton to hit a certain FSR threshold, so you want them to be pressing off the ground with a certain amount of force. You could set that target value here. Those FSRs are normalized between 1 and 0, and so you could set a target value of 0.5 that would hit you, or that would lie halfway through that threshold. And whenever they set that, well, if you were to set that in here, you'll see the secondary line, and it's set to 500, but you can see the scale factor here. That red line is going to be the target that the participant is trying to hit, and then the blue line is their FSR reading. I don't currently have FSRs on my exoskeleton right now, but if I were to press on them, you would see that reading increase. But if I press it with enough force to go past that threshold, the screen will light up green, and it will indicate that they've hit that threshold. And so it's just a visual way to convey to the participant that they either are or are not, say, pressing off the ground with the amount of force you want them to. And then the recalibrate FSRs button, if you're using an exoskeleton that uses FSRs, say an ankle, it will do that same calibration that it does at the start of every trial, where it reads the FSRs for a certain amount of time and then normalizes the maximum and minimum readings that were taken during that time to between 0 and 1. This button simply redoes that. If you got a bad calibration at the start, this button allows you to redo that calibration. And then lastly, worth noting, as with the previous version of the GUI, this pause button simply pauses the torque application. The controller you're running will still run after this button is pressed, but it won't send torque to the motors. So if, say, the participant stops for a minute or needs to stop to get a drink of water or something, you can pause the torque without ending the trial. That way they're not getting unexpected jolts of torque as they're standing still or doing something that the controller you're running isn't expecting. And so that's just been a quick overview of some of the changes that have been made in the newest version of the Python GUI, as well as in that config.ini file. So to recap, you will need to update your SD card with this newest config.ini file in order to be able to run the new GUI. The process of actually starting up the new GUI is identical to what it was before. And then a couple changes that have been made in the GUI apart from the visual difference is the fact that you'll need to press that calibrate torque button before you start a trial, even if you don't have torque sensors, and the updates made to the update controller button.